Here in America, we get a lot of confusion over, is this a euphonium, is this a baritone, is this in between? And truth be told, American-style baritones share a lot of characteristics with euphoniums. They're maybe not as conical, but they certainly have a conical bore compared to, for instance, this instrument. Their bells are going to be larger, and they're going to look, in general, more euphonium-ish. This is a UK-style baritone, and this certainly does not share many euphonium characteristics. Basic overview of this instrument. The bell is just over the width of my hand span, which is 8 inches. So an 8-inch bell on a baritone is pretty dang small. I mean, that's the size of like a small bore tenor trombone as far as I'm concerned. So yes, very small bell, very tight wrap. All the tubing has been fit into a small space. This pipe that on most US style baritones and euphoniums will pass over the valves, kind of over where your hand goes, has been compacted to fit just behind. Yeah, trying to think of special features. Small tenor trombone sized shank. I'm currently using a Bach 5G on it right now. You have your main tuning slide here. On this instrument, it practically doesn't work, but you make do with what you can get. This instrument needs a little bit more care than I have had the time to give it. Again, school instrument, so you get the idea. One water key here, nothing on here, so you have to actually pull out the slides. The third slide tubes are bent inward slightly, so they scrape along here and make it much harder to pull out than it needs to be. The third valve is kind of unresponsive. All of them are, they're all kind of noisy. There is nothing to dampen that noise inside the valves, it looks like. So, yes, the felts of on these valves need replacing. But in general, this is a intermediate level baritone that will serve most, high school, college, even some professional players for pretty much everything they need a baritone for. I've talked about the small shank and the small bell, and generally the somewhat cylindrical bore of the baritone as contrasted with the euphonium, which is much more conical. A lot of the times the euphonium will have a large shank, a much larger bell, probably 10, 11 inches if I had to guess. And what this means for the baritone, this particular one anyways, is that it has a very bright sound. I'm using somewhat of a large mouthpiece to counteract that, but still the sound is quite bright, and you also get a different perception of it from, for instance, a bell forward baritone or a euphonium, because the sound really is quite close to your ear and it's very direct without as much spread as the typical euphonium sound, so it's pretty bright. And generally the upper harmonics of the instrument will be a little bit more prevalent in the sound with a smaller construction like this. This doesn't mean that high notes are easier to play, because they're not easier to play on this than the YEP-201 that I have played before. It's, a euphonium of somewhat similar quality and price point. High notes feel about the same on each of them, but really the difference is how well you can hear the high overtones in the sound and how bright that sound is, and obviously this wins if that's what you're looking for. Of course, if you're looking for a mellower instrument, no. This instrument is fairly free-blowing, and it will take pretty much as much air as I can offer it, but it's certainly not the mellowest out there. As you probably heard in the intro clip, it's not a euphonium sound by any means. The baritone in the UK-style brass band plays quite a different role from the euphonium, and it's made to sound brighter than the euphonium for a very specific reason. The euphonium is a flavor instrument, if you will, in the brass band, where it really is meant to serve mostly as a solo instrument and sort of accentuate mellow moments. It's got a very special timbre compared to the rest of the band. The only instruments I would say that have a similar timbre are tuba, which tuba is not a solo instrument as it stands, and flugelhorn. So if it's a unique role in that regard, the baritone is very much a cut and dry, just this is the tenor voice of the brass band. Although baritone voice, I suppose, especially because alto horns down or up there are considered tenor horns. So this fills the tenor slash baritone role of the sort of standard soprano, alto, tenor, bass setup, and it's really a background instrument in a lot of cases. But an instrument like this can excel in march settings where you're supposed to play with a brighter sound. And I really enjoy playing marches on these. I feel like that's what it's best equipped for. Yeah, super bright. Fast runs do feel pretty good on this instrument. Typically, fast runs will feel, in my opinion, a little bit better on a smaller, more nimble sort of instrument as opposed to something like a euphonium. So, highs and lows, they all feel about the same as most instruments around this price point. The pedals are there, and I can play them, luckily. I really like an instrument with a good pedal, B flat. It's just my favorite note on the instrument, and I want to be able to play it well. But yes, the pedal harmonic is at least present. It's not the best, but it's far from the worst, of course. The next octave up is present, of course. The high octave is also, once again, present. Nothing special, nothing horrible. Low E natural might take some slide pulling. I don't like to mess with the third slide on this, to be totally honest, but if I hold this in a slightly less comfortable way, I can operate the first slide while I do that, so B natural and E natural can be a little bit more in tune. What I have done to better approximate the baritone sound and differentiate it from something like a euphonium sound is I've scrapped the 5G mouthpiece in favor of a 12C. This is smaller, shallower, and less pleasing for me to play on. But the point here is a smaller, shallower mouthpiece, etc., can change how the instrument projects, what kind of overtones you hear in the sound. So if you're actually trying to differentiate between baritone and euphonium, it's best to contrast the mouthpieces. And here's a little demo of why. It's really just a way brighter sound. So that's how you really put the two instruments, baritone and euphonium, at opposite ends of the tonal spectrum, is using different mouthpieces. And you can really hear, especially on top G, where the tone is just totally different on this mouthpiece. It kind of sounds like when you push a French horn really hard. This review has been quite informal, but that is the YBH? Yes, YBH-301 by Yamaha, made in Japan like all their instruments. 3-valve, intermediate level baritone. You can find these online for $1,000 to $1,500, and I think that's about fair considering the quality of this instrument. It's certainly nothing revolutionary, but it is a good, solid, high school, college, somewhat professional level instrument.